The wind howled across the snow-covered plains, sharp and cold like knives cutting through the night. Cal lived alone in a small cabin, built on the edge of the human settlement on planet Virelia. The land here was quiet, almost forgotten. That's why he liked it. No noise, no visitors, no orders, just peace. He sat by the fireplace, sipping a warm drink, wrapped in a thick blanket. The sound of wood crackling and the storm outside were the only things he heard, until someone knocked. Knock, knock, knock. Cal sat still for a moment. He wasn't sure if it was real or just his imagination. No one ever came out this far, not in the middle of a freezing night. But then the knock came again, louder and more urgent. He stood up quickly, grabbing the old pulse pistol from the wall, just in case. Slowly, he opened the door. There, standing in the snow, was an alien woman. Her skin was pale blue with a soft, natural glow under the moonlight. She looked tired, her long white hair sticking to her face, and her eyes wide with worry. In her arms, she held a small child. Another one stood behind her, barely old enough to walk. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I will share your bed, human. Just ensure my children survive." Cal was frozen, not from the cold, but from shock. He had heard stories of alien widows wandering the wilderness after raids, but he never imagined one would find her way here. He looked at the children. They were shivering, barely able to keep their eyes open. The younger one leaned against her mother's shoulder, too weak to even cry. Cal lowered his weapon. "Come inside," he said. The woman nodded, stepping into the warmth of the cabin, her children close to her sides. Cal shut the door behind them quickly. He grabbed extra blankets, laying them on the floor near the fire. "Sit here," he said. "Warm up first." She sat down slowly, placing the children beside her. Cal could see how thin they were, like they hadn't eaten in days. He moved to the small kitchen area and poured some hot water into a bowl with a few food cubes. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "I don't have much," he said, handing her the bowl. "But it should help." She took it with both hands and gently fed the children first. Only after they had eaten did she take a small sip herself. "My name is Cal," he said after a long silence. She looked up at him. "Liana." Cal nodded. "How did you find me?" "I followed the wind," she replied quietly. "And I hoped the stories were true, that a kind human lived beyond the trees." Cal frowned. "Stories?" She didn't answer. Instead, she wrapped the children in the blanket and looked into the fire. Her eyes were filled with sadness. But there was something else too. Strength. She had walked through a storm, carrying her children across frozen ground, to protect them. Cal sat across from her, still unsure what she had meant by sharing a bed. But now that he saw them cold, exhausted, and almost frozen, he understood. She didn't mean it the way most would take it. She meant warmth, safety, survival. On a planet like this, sometimes that was all you could ask for. "You can stay," he said after a while. "Just until the storm passes." Liana nodded slowly, but didn't say anything. The children soon fell asleep, their tiny bodies curled close to the fire. Cal added more wood to keep it going through the night. As the flames danced and shadows moved across the wooden walls, Cal couldn't stop looking at Liana. She had a soft beauty to her, even with her tired face and wet clothes. Her skin looked smooth, and her features were delicate. Her ears, slightly pointed, marked her as part of the alien tribes from the northern ridges. He had never met one in person. Until now. She glanced at him once, her voice calm but firm. "Thank you, Cal. I will not forget your kindness." Cal gave a small nod. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, the storm outside didn't feel as cold as before. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their tracks. And inside, something had begun. Something more than just a shelter from the cold. The next morning, the storm had not stopped. Snow piled up outside Cal's cabin, turning the world into a white silence. He stood at the window for a moment, watching the wind blow across the frozen trees. Then he turned around. The fire had burned low, but Lyanna and her children were still asleep near it. Their small forms were curled up under the thick blanket he had given them. Cal added more wood to the fire, careful not to wake them. He made a simple breakfast from what little he had left, some dried root bread and warm broth. As the smell filled the air, Lyanna's eyes slowly opened. She looked around for her children, then relaxed as she saw them still safe beside her. "You made it through the night," Cal said softly. She gave a small nod. "Thanks to you." The children woke soon after, and Cal offered them food. They ate slowly, politely, like they weren't used to having enough. Cal sat down across from them, still curious, still unsure why a woman like her had found her way to his door. After they ate, Lyanna looked at Cal with tired eyes. She seemed to be thinking hard, like she was deciding whether or not to speak. Finally, she said, "I think you deserve to know why we came." Cal didn't interrupt. He just listened. "My people lived far north of here," she began. "A quiet village hidden among the cliffs. We were not part of the war. We kept to ourselves. My mate was a strong protector. Our tribe called him Stoneheart because nothing could shake him." Her voice softened. "But one day, ships came, not from the stars, but from another clan, raiders. They wanted resources, and when we had nothing to offer, they attacked. They burned our homes, took some of our people, killed the rest." Cal's jaw tightened. He had heard of such things happening, even during peace years. No system was perfect. No border safe enough. "I ran," Lyanna continued. "I didn't think. I just took my children and ran into the cold. For days we walked, hiding during the day, moving at night." Cal leaned forward. "But how did you find me?" Lyanna looked at the fire. "An old tale my grandmother used to tell. She spoke of a human who lived on the edge of the White Woods, a man with a quiet heart who once saved a lost child. I didn't know if it was true, but I had no other path." Cal was silent. He didn't remember saving a child, but years living alone had blurred his memory. Maybe it had happened. Maybe fate had brought her to him. "I couldn't let my children die," she said simply. "I would give anything to keep them alive, even my pride." Her words struck something deep in Cal. She wasn't just strong. She was brave in a way he hadn't seen before. Not in war, not in duty, but in love. A mother's kind of courage. The children were playing quietly with a small wooden toy Cal had carved long ago. Watching them, Lyanna's face softened. "They haven't smiled in weeks," she said. "Not until now." Cal gave a small smile of his own. "They're safe here, for as long as they need." Lyanna looked at him. "And what about you? Are you not afraid that helping us might bring danger?" Cal shrugged. "Maybe. But I've lived alone long enough. Maybe it's time I did something that mattered." There was a long pause between them, quiet but not uncomfortable, the kind that comes when two people start to understand each other. That evening, as the storm outside continued to blow, Cal fixed the roof in case more snow came. Lyanna helped, holding the tools with steady hands. She was not weak. He could see that now. Her eyes stayed sharp. Her movements were sure. "You've done this before?" Cal asked. "Yes. My mate and I built many shelters together." She paused. "I miss his voice sometimes. He would laugh even during the hardest days." Cal nodded but didn't say anything. Some things didn't need replies. Later, they all sat by the fire again. The children had fallen asleep between them. Lyanna looked at Cal, her voice low and honest. "You saved us, Cal. I won't forget it. But I will not stay forever. I only ask that if something happens to me, you watch over them." Cal looked at the children, so small, so quiet. He didn't hesitate. "You have my word." Lyanna closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, "Then I can sleep without fear." And for the first time in many years, so could Cal. The next few days passed in a blur of snow, repairs, and quiet moments by the fire. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, things were calmer. Cal, once used to his solitude, found himself getting used to the sound of Lyanna's voice, the small laughter of her children, and the warmth of their presence. Still, the cold was unrelenting. The snow outside piled higher, and the temperature dropped every night. Cal had spent years living in isolation, learning to survive on his own. But now, he had a family to care for, whether they were his own or not. Lyanna helped him as best she could. She was strong, resourceful, and she had an air of calmness even when things seemed impossible. Cal found himself impressed with how she adapted to the little things, like fixing things around the cabin, making sure the fire never went out, and teaching her children to help with small chores. It wasn't long before Cal realized something. They weren't just surviving. They were becoming a family. But in the midst of the warmth and safety, there was a lingering unease. Every night, when the wind howled outside, Lyanna's eyes would sometimes flicker with a quiet, fearful look. Cal knew it wasn't just the cold she was afraid of. It was the uncertainty of what might come next. One night, as Cal stoked the fire, Lyanna sat at the table, her children sleeping nearby. She looked at Cal with a heavy expression. "We can't stay here forever," she said softly. "The raiders are still out there." Cal paused, his hand still on the firewood. He'd been thinking the same thing. They had a temporary shelter, but the reality was that they couldn't stay hidden for long. "They'll come looking for us," Lyanna continued, her voice steady but filled with fear. "They know I'm still alive. They'll search until they find me." Cal stood up straight, turning to face her. He could see the worry in her eyes, the kind of worry that came from a mother who had already lost everything. "We'll be ready for them," he said firmly. But deep inside, Cal knew it wouldn't be enough. No matter how many traps he set or how much they fortified the cabin, they couldn't keep raiders at bay forever. There was a limit to how much they could hide. The following morning, as the sun barely peeked over the horizon, Cal was already up, preparing. He gathered the tools, checked the door, and made sure the firewood was stocked for the day. Lyanna was up as well, brushing the snow off their makeshift door and taking a moment to look at the world outside. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the bleak horizon. Cal raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Fighting for us," she said, looking back at him. "I don't want to put you in danger. You've already given us so much. You've already saved us." Cal shook his head. "I made a promise. I'm not backing down." But inside, he couldn't shake the worry. Lyanna was right. He had never expected to be involved in a fight like this. And now the possibility of something far worse loomed just outside their cabin door. That afternoon, while the children played inside, Cal ventured out alone, walking along the edge of the trees. He was looking for any sign of the raiders, any sign that they had already started tracking them. His breath formed small clouds in the icy air, and the world around him felt eerily silent. The snow-covered ground crunched beneath his boots as he moved forward, keeping his eyes sharp for anything unusual. It wasn't long before he spotted something. Tracks in the snow. They were fresh, and they weren't from an animal. Cal crouched down, examining them carefully. They were human-sized, but there were too many to be just one person. A group, perhaps. The raiders. He stood up slowly, his heart racing. He couldn't be sure, but it seemed like the hunters were already getting closer. Cal turned and hurried back toward the cabin, hoping he wasn't too late. When he got back to the cabin, Lyanna was already at the window, her eyes scanning the trees in the distance. Her face tightened when she saw him approach. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cal didn't have to say anything. He could see it in her eyes. She knew too. "They'll be here soon," he said. "We have to prepare." He rushed inside, grabbing the last of the supplies, checking the weapons he had stored under the floorboards, and securing the cabin as best as he could. Lyanna helped, keeping the children hidden and calm. "We'll stay here, behind the walls," Cal said. "Stay out of sight. If they get too close, we'll take them by surprise." Lyanna nodded, her face filled with resolve. She had no intention of running again. Not this time. She would fight. She had to. The hours passed, each minute dragging like an eternity. Cal sat by the window, watching the storm rage outside, his eyes darting between the snow-covered ground and the distant trees. Then, just as the sun was setting, a faint sound reached his ears. The crunch of boots in the snow. Cal's heart raced. They had arrived. The wind howled outside the cabin, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of boots crunching through the snow. Cal's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched by the window, his eyes scanning the horizon. There was no mistaking it now. The raiders had found them. Lyanna was beside him, her expression hardening as she peered out. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. She held her children close, her arms wrapped protectively around them. Cal nodded but didn't speak. The time for words was over. The raiders were coming, and they would have to be ready. Every instinct in Cal told him that this would be their greatest test yet. "We'll hold the cabin," Cal said, his voice firm but calm. "Stay out of sight. If they get too close, we'll take them down quickly." Lyanna's gaze never left the window. She was already thinking ahead, preparing herself for the fight. Cal could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just going to wait. She wasn't going to hide. She was going to protect her children, no matter what. "You won't be alone," Lyanna said, her voice steady. "I know how to fight. I'll help you." Cal turned to her, surprised by the fire in her eyes. "I wasn't planning on you fighting. I don't plan on letting my children see another massacre," she replied, her voice cold. "I will fight, even if you don't want me to." Cal hesitated for a moment, but there was no time for argument. They had to act quickly. The raiders would be at the cabin any minute. He nodded in agreement. "We do this together." He moved to the small table in the corner, gathering what little weaponry he had. A few makeshift blades, a pulse gun he had modified, and some old grenades that had been left behind from his days in the outposts. He didn't have much, but it would have to do. Lyanna, meanwhile, was checking the window. She carefully measured the distance between the trees and the cabin, calculating their next move. Cal could hear the raiders getting closer. Their voices were muffled, but they were speaking in low tones, no doubt planning their next move. Cal knew from experience that raiders didn't waste time. They wouldn't hesitate to break down the door if they didn't find another way in first. "Where are they now?" Cal asked, his voice low. "About 100 yards out," Lyanna replied, keeping her eyes trained on the snow outside. "I think they'll try to surround us." Cal swore under his breath. He had to make sure they didn't get too close. He quickly grabbed the pulse gun and checked it, making sure it was fully charged. Lyanna looked at him, her face serious. "How do we fight them? What's the plan?" Cal took a deep breath. "We stay hidden. We wait until they're close. Then we attack fast, take out the leaders, and the rest will scatter. They won't expect us to fight back." Lyanna nodded. "Good. I'll take the left side. You cover the right." They both knew the plan was risky. If they made even one mistake, it could cost them everything. But there was no other choice. They had to fight for their survival. The minutes ticked by slowly, each second stretching out like an eternity. The children were quiet, sensing the danger in the air. Cal moved to the door, slowly locking it and reinforcing it with a few old crates. He knew it wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy them time. "They're getting closer," Lyanna said, her voice tense. Cal stood by the window again, peering through a small crack in the wood. He saw shadows moving in the snow, figures creeping through the trees, circling the cabin. He held his breath, his finger on the trigger of his pulse gun. Lyanna was ready too. They were as prepared as they could be. Then the first raider appeared at the edge of the trees, barely visible in the falling snow. He was tall, wearing dark armor and carrying a blaster. Cal could see the glint of metal in his hands. The man looked around cautiously, scanning the area. He was clearly looking for signs of movement. Cal's heart raced. This was it. They couldn't wait any longer. In a flash, Cal aimed the pulse gun and fired. The raider dropped to the ground without a sound. Lyanna was already on the move. She darted to the left, using the shadows to cover her approach. Her movements were quick, silent, like a predator stalking its prey. Another raider appeared, this one more cautious than the first. He looked down at his fallen comrade and cursed under his breath. Lyanna didn't hesitate. She charged forward, her knife flashing in the low light. With one swift movement, she took him down, pinning him to the ground before he could make a sound. Cal kept his eyes on the remaining raiders, waiting for them to make their move. He couldn't afford to miss another shot. The sound of footsteps outside grew louder. Another raider stepped into view, but this one wasn't like the others. He was larger, his armor more advanced. He had the look of a leader. Cal aimed carefully, but before he could pull the trigger, the raider turned and made a quick motion, as if sensing something was wrong. He wasn't going to get away that easily. Cal fired first. The last raider crumpled to the ground. His body limp as he fell, just as Cal had hoped. The pulse shot had hit him square in the chest, dropping him instantly. But Cal knew there were more. He had heard them outside, moving quietly through the snow. The cabin was only safe for so long. They had to finish this quickly. Lyanna wiped the blood from her blade, looking at Cal with a steady, determined gaze. "There's no time," she said. "The others are coming. We need to move." Cal nodded. They had no choice now. The surprise was over, but they couldn't afford to let their guard down. The raiders would know something was wrong, and they'd come rushing in. It was only a matter of time before they decided to storm the cabin. "Get the children," Cal said, his voice low. "Get them to the back. Make sure they stay hidden." Lyanna didn't argue. She moved quickly, gathering the children and ushering them to the far corner of the cabin where they would be safe. Cal could hear the children's soft, fearful whispers as they huddled together, trembling. But Cal knew that fear wouldn't help them now. It was up to him, and Lyanna, to protect them. He turned to the window, keeping his eyes on the approaching raiders. The remaining three had split up, no doubt planning to circle the cabin from different angles. Cal knew that meant they would try to break in from the back. "Lyanna," he called softly. She was already moving back toward him, her eyes sharp and alert. "We'll have to force them to come through the front door," Cal said, his voice steady. "That's the only way we can control the situation." She nodded, grabbing another weapon, a sharp, jagged piece of metal she had fashioned from the wreckage of an old ship. "I'll cover the right side. You take the left. If they break in, don't hesitate. We take them down fast." Cal felt a surge of respect for her. She wasn't just some helpless woman hiding behind a door. She was a fighter, and she knew how to protect what was hers. Her determination made him feel stronger, more certain. Together, they positioned themselves by the door, both ready for whatever would come next. The children were out of sight, hidden behind a stack of crates and blankets. The best they could do was wait for the raiders to make their move. Outside, the wind howled louder. Cal's breath came in short bursts as he tried to steady his nerves. He wasn't used to fighting alongside anyone, not since the days when he had been a soldier. But this felt different. There was more at stake now. It wasn't just his life anymore. It was theirs. He could hear the raiders' footsteps growing louder. They were closing in. Cal glanced at Lyanna. She was ready, her face set in a fierce expression. No fear, no hesitation. Then there was a loud crash. The door splintered as one of the raiders kicked it in. Cal didn't hesitate. He leaped forward, aiming for the first raider to step through the door. The raider was tall and built like a tank, his face obscured by a helmet, but his body language screamed arrogance. He was too confident, too sure of his victory. Cal shot first. The pulse blast hit the raider in the chest, sending him stumbling back. But he didn't go down. Instead, he pulled out his own weapon and fired back, grazing Cal's shoulder. The pain was sharp, but Cal didn't stop. He kept his gun raised, firing again. This time, the blast hit the raider square in the chest, and he crumpled to the ground. But there was no time to celebrate. Cal quickly turned to his left, where another raider was already sneaking up on him. This one was faster, more agile. Before Cal could react, the raider lunged, knocking him to the ground. The two struggled, fists flying, but Cal managed to get his legs free and kicked the raider off of him. He grabbed his pulse gun again, firing just as the raider scrambled to stand. The raider fell with a final, gurgling breath. Cal stood, his body aching from the struggle, but he had no time to rest. He knew there was still one more left. The leader. Leanna was already moving toward him, her blade in hand, ready to strike. They could feel it. This was the final battle. One last fight to survive. The leader burst into the cabin, his eyes wide in fury. He wasn't the same as the others. He was a soldier, and he wasn't going to back down. His gun was raised, ready to fire. Leanna moved quickly, slamming her blade into his arm, knocking the gun from his hand. The leader roared in pain, but Leanna didn't hesitate. She aimed for his throat, but he dodged, his fist catching her in the side. She stumbled back, but Cal was already there, pulling the leader's arm behind him and twisting it until he heard a crack. The leader yelled, struggling to break free, but it was no use. Cal brought his knee up into the man's chest, knocking the wind out of him. Leanna was quick to follow up, delivering a final blow to his head with the metal shard. The leader collapsed, motionless. The cabin fell silent. The only sound was their heavy breathing and the wind howling outside. Cal looked around at the bodies of the fallen raiders, then turned to Leanna. She was breathing hard, her face covered in sweat and dirt, but there was no sign of fear in her eyes, only relief. "We did it," Cal said quietly. Leanna nodded. "We're safe, for now." Cal looked over to the children. They hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound during the entire fight. But now, Cal saw their small faces peeking from behind the crates. They were watching, wide-eyed but safe. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Cal allowed himself to relax. The aftermath of the fight was heavy, but the quiet that followed was almost as intense as the battle itself. Cal stood over the fallen raiders, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he wiped the blood from his hands. The pain in his shoulder was beginning to throb, but he didn't care. The fight was over. They had won. Leanna, too, was standing a few feet away, her blade still clutched tightly in her hand. Her breathing was slow, controlled, but Cal could see the exhaustion on her face. She had fought with everything she had, protecting her children and herself. But the cabin was no longer the safe haven it once was. Now it was filled with the cold reality of survival. The raiders were dead, but the threat wasn't over. The children were still watching them from the corner, their wide eyes never leaving the scene of the battle. Cal turned to Leanna. "We need to get them out of here. It's not safe anymore." Leanna nodded, glancing at the children. "We'll leave in the morning," she said, her voice steady despite the weariness in her tone. "But for now, we need to keep moving." Cal glanced around the cabin. There was so much work to do. The raiders had left their mark. The door was damaged, and the walls were cracked from the impact of the fight. There was no way they could stay here forever. They had to leave. He walked over to the window, peering out into the night. The snow was falling harder now, a thick, unrelenting blanket covering the world outside. It was both beautiful and dangerous. It would make travel difficult, but they didn't have a choice. They needed to find a safer place, somewhere far from the raiders and the violence that followed them. "Leanna," Cal said, turning to her, "we can't stay here much longer. We need to head east. There's a small settlement I know of. We can make it there in a couple of days if we leave at first light. Lyanna didn't hesitate. "We'll go tomorrow," she said, looking down at her children. "But for tonight, let's make sure they sleep. They've been through enough." Cal nodded, understanding. They needed to rest. They needed to gather strength for the journey ahead. He turned to the children, who were still huddled together by the fire. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with fear, but they were safe now. They had made it through the worst. Cal could see the trust in their eyes, the belief that he and Lyanna would protect them. He sat down next to them, smiling gently. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now." The children didn't say anything, but the way they relaxed, just a little, told Cal everything he needed to know. They were still scared, but they had hope now. And that was all that mattered. Lyanna moved to the other side of the room, gathering some of their belongings. The children had already fallen asleep, exhausted by the day's events. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, but inside the cabin, it was peaceful. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound filling the room. Lyanna joined Cal, sitting down beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was so much left unsaid, so many emotions that were too complicated to put into words. Cal finally broke the silence. "I don't know if we'll make it to the settlement. The weather's getting worse." "We'll make it," Lyanna said quietly, her voice full of determination. "We've made it this far, haven't we?" Cal nodded. He had to believe that. They had survived the worst. They had fought back against the raiders, and now they had to keep moving forward. "We'll leave at dawn," Cal said. "We'll get the children ready, and we'll make it." Lyanna looked at him, her eyes softening. "I'm glad you're with us," she said. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Cal met her gaze, his expression serious. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "We're in this together. We'll make it through." For the first time in days, Lyanna smiled. It was a small smile, but it was enough to lift the weight off Cal's shoulders. They had each other, and that was all they needed. For now, that was enough. The night stretched on, but neither Cal nor Lyanna slept much. They both knew what awaited them in the morning. The journey wouldn't be easy, but they had a goal now, a place to reach, a future to fight for. As the storm raged outside, Cal kept his eyes on the children, still sleeping soundly. He knew they would make it through this. They had to. They had each other. And in the end, that was enough. The first light of dawn broke through the cabin's small windows, casting long shadows on the floor. Cal was already awake, the weight of the journey ahead heavy on his shoulders. He didn't move immediately. Instead, he sat still for a moment, listening to the soft sounds of the cabin. The wind outside was calmer now, but the storm had left the world covered in a thick layer of snow, making travel dangerous. Lyanna stirred beside him. She hadn't slept much, but when she opened her eyes, they were filled with the same determination that had carried them this far. "Morning," Cal said quietly, looking at her. "Morning," Lyanna replied, her voice a little rough. She pushed herself up, brushing a hand through her tangled hair. Her gaze shifted to the children, still sleeping soundly in the corner, unaware of the dangers that awaited them. Cal had to admire her strength. She was determined to protect them, no matter what it took. "We need to move fast," Cal said. "The longer we stay here, the more danger we'll be in. The raiders won't stop looking for us." Lyanna nodded. "I know, but we need to make sure the kids are ready. They need rest. They've been through too much already." Cal stood and walked to the window, checking the conditions outside. The snow was still coming down heavily, but the sky had lightened, signaling that the worst of the storm might be over. It would be hard to travel through the deep snow, but they had no choice. They had to keep moving. "I'll prepare the supplies," Cal said. "You get the children ready." Lyanna didn't need to be told twice. She moved quickly, gathering the few belongings they had left. Cal grabbed their food supplies and packed them into a small bag. It wasn't much, just enough to get them through the day. They couldn't carry too much. Every extra weight would slow them down. As Liana finished packing, she turned to Cal. I don't know what will happen next. I don't know if we'll make it. Cal met her gaze, his expression serious. We will. We have to. For them. Liana didn't respond, but her eyes softened. She walked over to her children and gently woke them. The little ones stirred, their eyes blinking open in confusion, but Liana's calming presence immediately put them at ease. We're going on a journey, she told them softly. We're going to find a safe place where we can live without fear. Can you be brave for me? The children nodded, though their faces were still filled with uncertainty. Cal could see it in their eyes. They had been through too much for such young ones to understand fully. But they trusted Liana, and they trusted Cal. That was enough for now. As the children dressed, Cal and Liana took one last look around the cabin. It had been their home for a short while, a place of safety in the midst of danger. But now it was time to leave it behind. They had no choice. The world outside was waiting. Cal took one last glance at the raiders' bodies, now stiff from the cold. It was a sobering sight, but there was no time for regret. They had fought and survived, and now it was time to keep moving. We leave now, Cal said, his voice firm. Stay close. We'll move fast. Liana nodded, gathering the children into her arms. She led the way to the door, Cal following closely behind. The air outside was cold, but at least the storm had weakened. The snow had settled into a thick layer on the ground, making it difficult to walk. But Cal knew they could manage. They had to. The journey ahead would be tough. They didn't know what awaited them in the settlement Cal had mentioned, but it was their best chance for safety. Every step that they took would bring them closer to the future they wanted. A future without fear, without hiding, without running. The wind bit at their skin as they made their way through the deep snow, the children's small footprints trailing behind them. Liana moved carefully, making sure the children kept up. Cal kept his eyes on the horizon, scanning for any signs of danger. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard. The raiders were still out there, and they might not be alone. As they walked, Cal couldn't help but think of how far they had come. From the moment he had opened the door to find Liana standing there, everything had changed. He had been alone for so long, lost in his own thoughts, his own world. But now he had something to fight for, something to protect. They walked for hours, the snow crunching underfoot, the silence of the world pressing in around them. The children were quiet now, exhausted from the previous day's events. Liana kept them moving, encouraging them when they seemed to tire. Cal stayed at the front, his mind focused on the path ahead. They couldn't afford to rest for long. The longer they stayed in one place, the more vulnerable they became. As the day wore on, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow. Cal stopped briefly to check the map he had brought. They were still a day's journey from the settlement, but if they kept moving, they could make it by tomorrow night. We'll stop soon, Cal said. We need to rest. Liana nodded, but she didn't stop moving. She kept the children close, and Cal fell in step beside her. No matter how difficult the journey was, no matter how uncertain the future seemed, one thing was clear: they were not alone anymore. They had each other, and that was enough to keep them going.